The amateur versus pro dynamic is so fun in the high-stakes cash games, and Dan Shak is one of the very frequent amateurs. He's a pretty good amateur.
Oh, yeah.
But he's playing against a real pro in Manig Loeser, a player we haven't seen on the breakdown before, but who has a lot of success in this cash game.
He's actually 101st on the all-time poker tournament money list, so even if you haven't heard of him, he's been on the EPT a bit. He plays a lot of super high roller type things, but here he is playing this 5100 game with Dan Shak.
And this is what looks like a cooler.
Yeah.
And there's definitely something to talk about even so, because Manig Loeser makes some incredible decisions here that
Yes.
we really like. And that's probably why it was suggested by Andrew Liffey on Twitter.
Now, if you have a suggestion for the breakdown, tweet it at us, include a YouTube link, and of course, timestamp that puppy.
Choo, choo.
What's that? What is that
choo,
sound?
ding, ding, ding,
Is
ding,
that the
choo.
Nitrogen Sports Poker Train?
That is the Nitrogen Sports Poker Train.
Holy moly.
Where all of your dreams come true.
All aboard!
Now, all of your nightmares come true if you don't use the link in the description when you sign up, though, and I don't want to elaborate on that because I might have to go to jail. But use the link when you sign up for Nitrogen Sports Poker Room. That way you gain access to all of the Poker Guys special events, which currently means a monthly tournament with a huge overlay.
Yeah, a huge overlay, meaning there's 1,000 buy-ins to your very small 65-cent buy-in, but 1,000 buy-ins guaranteed. We usually get like 80 players. Massive overlay. You're just burning money at the stake if you don't get in there
at the
and
stake.
get you some poker. But you got to use the link in the description.
Sixes. Oh my lord.
Sixes, sevens, and eights. How about a 6, 7, 8 flop?
Where's the fives for the 4-bet?
Yeah, so we need
oh,
fives in there. So
squeeze.
when it comes 6, 7, 8, all the sets can lose.
What time does like everything kick off in the day?
Wow! Oh my word!
I mean, you didn't.
Bye-bye profit, Manig.
You didn't quite call that.
2.5 in there. Dan surely will see bet.
It's like, long as
It kind of like puts you in good trend for the game.
Pot.
that's why I get into the game because I've got like 4
Pot
days
it
off.
is.
just
A little bit
pots
more
it.
than pot. We're going for 100 on top.
Ben made it to Wednesday, take Wednesday as well.
That's quite
Ooh,
sick.
the 8. Well, look at this. He quickly gets out of the way. He's not going to have a chip in the pot. Manig.
To give me a few days.
Now, does he check raise? Does he check call?
I mean, I would probably be check raising here. I
Right,
mean,
Dan's played so snug.
yeah, it really looks like Dan has like ace, king, king, queen, or aces, something of that nature.
Bye.
I mean, if-
profit. He does just check call.
25 star.
I'm not. Yeah, I don't. I think check raising is probably better here in general.
Right,
I mean,
yeah. I mean, obviously, seeing what we've seen, I'm not sure if Manig's being related to hands. You would check raise. And wow.
I mean, the thing is, like, if Dan's bluffing, it's not like he's just going to continue to barrel off big, you know?
Right.
And yeah, okay, you look really strong when you check raise here, but I don't think, you know, if Dan has ace king or aces, I don't think he's going to fold them.
This is great now. Dan bets.
It's Dan gonna,
Both are gonna
Dan's
think the
going to
other person
bomb
has
it
a king.
again. He's going 7k? 8k! He's overbet flop and turn.
Yeah, this is it. This is it. So Manig's gonna. He's got ace king now. Let's get him. Wow.
I mean, no way Manig can fold, but I mean, he must be a little concerned. I mean,
this is gonna be
double
the biggest
overbet.
pot. But I mean, what? Yeah, he's got ace king probably. This is what you're thinking.
You would be thinking there's some sort of king.
Obviously, there is the one likely hand that beats you is sevens.
I'm gonna get a cold, you know.
What kings wouldn't bet this?
Feel it coming on.
Yeah, I've got a bit of a cold.
Manig is gonna just call. GTO, and maybe that's not necessary, but whatever happens here, this is almost certainly getting on the river. 10 is the card.
I've got a little something for you.
3 overbets.
Come on. Come on, Dan, go big.
Yeah.
Hey,
He's
he's
all
done
in.
it.
41k.
That was a really, really bad feeling. I think I have way too good of a hand. Can I get a count, please?
Wow, Manig senses something. I mean, obviously King 10's the most like concern, right?
Takes like 4 minutes.
I mean, the real problem here is like, can you ever think that Dan has a bluff? Trying to get a read there. Bringing up 8-9. The thing is, Manig is going to be very hesitant to make this kind of fold on stream. Because if people see him fold here and Dan Shak had ace king, Manig is not going to be allowed back in Germany.
So we're gonna get you ready for the fold.
Wow!
Well, that is a pretty showy fold, and it didn't look that hard for Manig Loeser. How did he do that with such ease, Jonathan?
Well, I think we have to look at the whole story of the hand for this to make any sense at all, because normally you would think, wow, I have such a strong hand here and I can come up with hands I can beat. That's great. But let's look at the whole thing. So Dan raises pre, 3 other people call, fine. Manig's in the big blind, he calls with 2 6s, great. We flop a set of 6s. This is amazing. Manig decides to play this passively on the flop, which I think ends up working out incredibly well for him.
Yeah.
A lot of times you're not going to see someone do this, but he decides just to check call. Now, important to note, Dan is already betting more than the pot, even on the flop.
Right, he's betting 2,500 into 2,400, and this is into 3 opponents. So that shows some significant strength there, and that might give Manig Loeser some pause. Now, on the flop, I'm sure he still feels pretty confident.
Yeah.
I think the major reason he doesn't check raise is the fear that Dan Shak is going to fold some one-pair hands when Shak sizes it this way into 3 opponents. So he thinks it's better value for me to just call and hope that Dan either improves to a 2-pair or trips type hand, or maybe he just gets stubborn later instead of now.
Now, we go into a lot of talk on the podcast about are there other ways Manig could play this. We talk about the benefits and sort of pros and cons of check raising. We get really into should Manig just lead here. I actually think he probably should, but that's for the podcast if you want to hear us get deep into other ways to play this on the flop. Manig decides to check, and he decides to call when Dan bets this big, and Dan's sort of polarizing himself.
Right, and then the turn comes, and immediately both players are ecstatic, I'm sure, because they're thinking, oh, now I can really get value. My opponent might really have trip kings. In fact, that's my opponent's most likely holding here. This is great. Unfortunately for Manig, it's really just a very bad situation. So Manig decides to check again, which I think makes all the sense in the world because Dan's probably going to bet trip kings anyway, and if Dan decides he wants to rep trip kings, this is a good card for him to do it on because now trip kings is possible. So Manig checks, and Dan once again overbets the pot. He bets 8K into 7,400. And that's a little scary on this card.
It's a little bit weird. I mean, I don't think as Manig we would think we're losing, but it is notable, and we can still raise here. I don't think it's crazy to raise by any means at all, but we may be worried about, are we going to lose some of Dan's trip kings here if Dan has a bad kicker
I think it
or
is
something
crazy
like
to
that.
raise, actually. I think it's kind of bad to raise here.
Even though you can put him on trip kings?
I don't think Dan's going to call with trip kings a lot when he sizes this way on 2 streets.
I don't know if that's true or not.
If for some reason I was vaulted into Dan Shak's
Yeah.
seat, having bet 8K on the turn and 2,500 on the flop, and I got raised when I bet this turn card 8K, I would fold.
Okay,
if I had King Jack or something.
But you're not Dan Shak, and Dan Shak
Yeah.
isn't you. And in fact, let's go to Dan Shak right now. Dan Shak here, and I just want to say I probably would call with trip kings.
We don't know that for sure, though.
No, we don't know. But I guess but I think it's important to say, like, Dan Shak is an amateur. Manig Loeser is a professional, and they're going to think about the game differently. Like, the fact that Dan's even betting this way is something that you're almost never going to see a professional do against another professional, right?
That said, clearly Manig believes some version that he's not going to get value by raising, or it's not the best way to get value because he decides just to call here.
Yeah.
Now, that might be a little bit of fear of a better hand, or it might be that he feels like he can't actually get action from some of the trip kings that Dan has if he raises here. Not really sure, but Manig decides, okay, it's just a call. Let's get to the showy part, though.
Yeah, really,
let's get to the river, because this is an interesting freaking fold. How do you do it?
I mean, let's start with Dan Shak's bet, first of all.
Okay.
So he bets almost twice the pot, right?
That's a big bet.
It's a huge bet. It's pretty interesting, right? Because on one level, I get why Dan's doing this, right? He's saying, like, if you have trip kings, you may just feel like you have to call. Hey, that 10 completes a straight.
Yeah.
That's pretty good, too.
It's
You
kind
may
of
feel,
got to be 8-9 of clubs, though, right?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Because we bet so much on
Yeah.
the turn, because he check called 8,000. He doesn't have, so the only straight he really has is one combo. That actually makes it not as good again. But still, like, if you have trip kings, if you have king queen, you may just feel like you have to call here. So I'm going to go for all of it. And Dan gets greedy.
I guess he was wrong because he gets a fold out of a much better hand than trip kings here.
Much better, and a quick fold.
All right, so let's talk about how Manig does this.
Okay.
What are the hands that he is concerned about?
Well, the most obvious one is king 10.
Yeah, king 10 feels like all day that's what Dan has, the way he played this hand. I just would be so concerned about king 10. The real question is, would Dan do this with just trip kings?
That is really unanswerable, too. Like, I believe he probably wouldn't bet this much because maybe he'd be a little bit more afraid of the straight, even though it's not really logical. He's still maybe he might be afraid of some of the full houses or something like that. Maybe with pocket sevens, there's only one hand Dan has to worry about at all, truly, right?
And it's King 10.
I mean, I guess King 6 suited, but like it's very unlikely.
Very unlikely.
But King 10 makes a lot more sense that Manig would have that, right? So. I believe if Dan had Ace King, he would bet, but I don't know that he'd bet 41,000. I think he might bet 12,000, 14,000,
Yeah.
17,000. And Manig might even go for a check raise if Dan bets small because he sort of feels like there's some weakness there. He
I mean,
might.
if you bet very small, it would seem hard to get
I think that's
action.
12,000.
Maybe, yeah. But with this size, I would be sitting there thinking, I don't really think Dan's betting trip kings this size, even ace king. I really don't think he's doing it.
I would wonder anyway. It's Dan Shak. I don't know. I don't know
think-
what Dan Shak's doing. He bets really big sometimes.
I think he would for sure do it with any full house, and we have the worst full house.
That is a
so
problem.
that's a problem, and I really don't know that he would do it with trip kings or a straight. So that's another problem. It
Yeah.
makes me want to fold the way Manig Loeser folded.
I don't disagree with any of that. However, I would like to say that if Dan Shak hit 8-9, he might decide when he gets there on the river, oh my God, if Loeser has trip kings, he's going to have to pay me off and sort of be in the same spot.
There's a
except
problem with
have
that.
a slightly worse hand, yeah.
Dan bet the turn. He bet 8K into 7,400 on the turn when Manig decided to call the large bet on the flop and the top card paired.
Yeah,
I don't
that's a
think
good
Dan's
point.
necessarily going to bet all of his 8-9s there.
That's a really good point. If he does, he may not bet this much.
Yeah.
That's a really, really good point.
Right, so I would be thinking about all of this as Manig Loeser, and I would call in Manig's spot. I'm pretty sure I would in the moment, although after having thought about it, I would then say that was a horrible call. I should never be calling here because I'm not even sure Dan's going to bet ace king, and I don't think he has very much 8-9 in his range, so what am I beating?
I mean, he's going to bet ace king. He's not going to bet this much, right? with
Right,
ace king, yeah.
sure.
It's cool you say that because I feel the same way. I feel like I would call almost certainly, but I would think about it later really deeply, as deep as we are able to think about it anyway, and ultimately decide, oh, that was probably a mistake. Even though it was such a pretty hand and it's kind of near the very top of my range, it still was probably a mistake.
And Manig may know Dan. They might have played quite a bit, and Manig may know for sure that Dan's not betting trip kings to this size because of the comfort with which he folds. That makes me believe that.
I mean, comfort and speed. He folds in like 40 seconds. That's ridiculous to fold a hand this strong in this spot. I personally would take a strong 10 minutes and then call. So that's the difference between me and Manig, I guess.
That's a nice play, Manig.
Yeah. Okay, maybe one of the showiest folds we've ever done.
Very showy. It's very showy. It's a full house.
Maybe one of the best folds we've ever seen as well on this show. We've been doing this show for years now. What do you think? Do you like this bet by Dan Shak? Do you like this fold by Manig Loeser? I know how it worked out, but do you like it sort of not knowing what the other player had? Do you like these plays?
It's hard to remember not knowing what the other player had, though.
I know,
it's a
of
tough
course.
spot.
But otherwise, it's easy to say what we'd want to do, right? So we got to think sort of blindly to when we're actually in these guys' shoes, do we like these decisions or not? So let us know in the comments what you think about this river play. And actually, really, Dan Shak's betting and Manig Loeser deciding to just check call until all the way through. We want to see what you have to say.
Yeah, do you guys think Dan messed this up? Is this Dan's fault? Like, should he have made more money in this hand? What do you think?
I mean, probably, but I don't know, man. Let us know. I
Yeah,
mean,
let
I
us
kind
know.
of like that he went for it.
Yeah.
Also, you know.
And I thought that fold was really good. I would even consider it elite. And
Oh, yeah.
we've seen a lot of elite plays on the breakdown over the years. If you want to check those out, click right up there.
Some really good hands up in there. Really good. Classic Davide Katai, Johnny Lawton hand.
Oh, that
one's
good.
One of our true classics.
Yeah.
If you want to know more about this hand, though, and we get into it, I mentioned this earlier in the video as well. We really talk about all the different possible decisions on this particular decision tree. And let me tell you, Manig Loeser does not go down a lot of normal paths here. We sort of look at all the possible paths he could go down. Should he be leading? Should he be check calling? Should he be check raising? And we really talk about it on every street because it's a viable thing to talk about on every street. So if you want to hear a lot more about that and just a lot more about this hand, you got to check out our podcast, The Breakdown presented by the Poker Guys. It's available on all the podcast apps, Stitcher, all the things. Check it out.
Definitely check it out. And if you like this video, make sure you subscribe to this YouTube channel.